Hello everyone. In this video, let's talk about the keyword final in Java programming. So in Java, we can use final to define variables, methods, as well as classes. Let's first take a look at final variables. So if a variable is defined as final, it means that it cannot be modified after initialization. And we must initialize the final variable. Let's look at an example. So let's switch to our employee class. Let's try to make this ID field a final variable. So after private, let's type final. As you can see, we got an error right after we done that. That's because we need to initialize this ID field since it is final. Otherwise, the Java compiler will complain that it's not initialized. In order to fix this, let's initialize this ID. We can give it a value within the same line as the declaration of the variable. Or we can initialize this ID inside of the constructor. We can say this.id equals 6. Now, as you can see, the error goes away. There's another error in our setID method. That's because, as we talked about before, once the final variable is initialized, you cannot reassign it another value. So we cannot use setID to change the value of the ID. So this is invalid. Let's comment this out to fix this error. So that's how you use final in front of a primitive data type. Let's change it to what it was. So let's delete the final and uncomment the set method and comment out the constructor. Let's take a look at another example. Let's go to main.java, and this time let's define a final variable that is pointing to an object. So let's make this employee a final variable. As you can see, the compiler didn't complain because we initialized the employee after declaration. But we also used the setID method on object A, but we didn't get a complaint from the compiler. That's because for final objects, we can use methods to modify their internal structure and value, but we cannot rebound them to reference other objects. So if I create another employee object, I cannot change A to reference that object. Now let's take a look. So down here, let's create another employee object. Employee B equals new employee, and give it a first name, and then a last name. Now let's try to point A to B. So let's do A equals B. As you can see, we got an error. I cannot assign a value to a final variable A, so we know it's invalid. So let's delete this, fix the error. Now let's talk about final method. Let's go to our person.java file. So a final method in Java means that the method cannot be overridden by its subclass in inheritance. Now let me prove this to you. So we have the getDetail method, which is overridden inside of the employee class. Now let's try to mark the getDetail method as final in our person.java file. And let's switch to employee class. As you can see, we got an error. Right? That's because the overriding method is final. So this is super useful if you don't want your method to be overridden by other subclasses. You can mark them as final. Let's change it back to what it was. Last but not least, let's talk about final class. So in inheritance, if we mark a class as final class, it means that we cannot extend that class. In other words, the class cannot be the superclass of any other class. So if I mark the person class as final, our employee class, as you can see, we got an error. We cannot extend a final class. So our employee.java become invalid. This is super useful if you want to prevent inheritance. You want to create some immutable classes in your program. So that's all I want to talk about the final keyword. Hope you guys learned something. Thanks for watching and see you next time.